how are you? Welcome back to my channel. I thought it would be time to do another book haul. I recently already did a book haul and I will link it down below. But I got such a big influx of books that is already time, and I think I've got about 17 books, so let's get into it. My mum visited recently and I've got a lot of books at her house, sort of in storage. So I moved from where I'm from and I emigrated to the UK. But that kind of means that you can't really bring all of the books you own, even though I would have liked to. I was kind of constrained by, the physical limit that I could just carry with me in a suitcase. And over the years, I have slowly but steadily been moving all the books that I used to have sort of into my collection in the UK. And my mom is very kind and has brought some more books that I already owned and have already owned for years, but she has brought them over and I will include them in this haul because they're sort of new to me, even though I didn't purchase them recently. At the same time, some of these I haven't seen for years and I haven't read them yet. So it feels appropriate to just add them to this book haul. The first book in this section is Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco. And now I have not read this yet, and I also don't really know what it's about. I had like a quick browse of the back, and for some reason it kind of reminds me of a Da Vinci Code, but then for professors. Like it's sort of like a more complicated Da Vinci Code. Like this seems to be the same sort of like conspiracy, finding clues type of thing, but at the same time I also know that Umberto Eco is a professor and that his books have a tendency to be quite well researched as well as complicated. So I don't know, this sounds very interesting. It sounds like nothing I've really read before, and I'm quite looking forward to giving this one a shot. The next book that she brought was Paradise Lost by John Milton, and I have started reading this when I was supposed to be reading it for my undergrad, which is a long time ago, and I sort of quit around here. And this is epic poetry about the fall of Adam and Eve. I have to admit, I know very little about biblical stuff. I sort of know like the highlights. I am aware of the general stories in the Bible, but at the same time, the details of it are kind of blurry for me. So I found this, first of all, because I'm just really not familiar with epic poetry, I found this hard to read in general. But I also found the themes of it slightly difficult to connect with. So I don't know if I should first like improve my knowledge of the Bible story itself before I tackle this, or if I should just read a little bit more around Paradise Lost, like read some criticism, maybe that'll help. This is one that I would like to tackle again, and maybe this time actually finish it. Next is a book that I did read, which is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, I know and I understand that this is a very controversial book, especially for people who sort of read this very superficially, who just go like, how dare you write a book with a main character who is a pedophile and who doesn't really perhaps receive much of criticism within the book because he is the narrator. However, I think this is a much more complex book than it is given credit for, and although maybe I didn't enjoy it because it's also really grim, it's also quite awful, I do think it's extremely well written and it definitely deserves its place in the literary canon. And I do think that the way it treats its narrator and the way the reader is sort of enveloped into this narrative and sort of is invited to be sympathetic to the narrator, who's sort of like a bumbling kind of, he's called Humbert Humbert, and he is a Humbert Humbert. You can just, the name really gives a good impression of what he's like, and the reader is invited to sympathize with him, even though the things that he does are absolutely awful. And I think this sort of contrast and this conflict that lies at the heart of this novel is actually really well done and is also really fascinating from a literary perspective. So I quite appreciate Lolita and I would love to reread this sometime. Next is The Well of Loneliness by Radclyffe Hall. And this is a really old copy and I don't even remember buying this. I have no idea where I got it from. It's from the 70s and it's a very special looking one. But this is one of the first novels, or is considered one of the first novels, where there is a love story between two women, and what's particularly interesting about it is that none of them like die. At least that's what I've heard. I have not read this, so I can't tell you if that is actually true. But that is sort of what I remember people saying about it. So that this is one of the novels where the sapphic longing isn't seen as um criminal or something to be penalized. At least that is what I remember. I would love to read this sometime, and I'm quite happy to have this back in my collection so I can actually give it a shot. Next up is a book that I was supposed to read in my undergrad and I didn't, and that is The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. Now, what I find really funny is that my bookmark is actually still in this book, so if you can see it, it is on page 12. So I made it to the grand total of page 12 while I was supposed to be reading this for, I think, a cultural history course. It is about a man who's in a sanitarium, and while he's there he has these philosophical like conversations with the other people that are there, and aside from that I have no idea where that goes because I never made it even past the first chapter, I think. I found it quite intimidating because it's so philosophical, and especially at the time I kind of struggled with engaging with philosophy. I think nowadays, because I've read more and I'm just a bit more aware of various philosophical concepts, etc., I think I should really revisit this. And surely this time I will make it past page 12. Fingers crossed. Next up is a book that intimidates me even more, and I think this might be the most intimidating book that I own, and it is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And, you know, it's long. Everyone knows that War and Peace is very long, is generally known as like one of the longest books in literature. I think what really makes me nervous about this one is the war section, because War and Peace is supposed to be like this sort of sweeping epic about the Napoleonic War, and I kind of struggle with books about war, especially World War II. I think that's probably my least favorite historical topic just in the world. But even sort of historical warfare, it just doesn't really interest me. It kind of puts me off for some reason. So I'm kind of scared of this one, but at the same time, I do really want to read it. And I wonder whether I should like find someone else who also wants to read War and Peace and maybe read it together, and so we can like support each other, because I feel like I would need that support. We are solidly in the Russian section right now. So the next one that I have is another chonker, and it is another book with really strong philosophical undertones, and that is The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. And I have read Dostoevsky before. I've read Notes from Underground, and I've read, I was going to say Great Expectations, but that's Charles Dickens. Crime and Punishment. That is not similar at all. I don't know why that got confused in my brain. This is supposed to be one of Dostoevsky's like greats, like his magnum opus. And I know that it's a lot about philosophy and particularly about religion. Now, I'm not super like up to date with the religious debates of the 19th century, so I'm slightly intimidated by that aspect. On the other hand, I do know that Dostoevsky is a really great writer. So in that sense, having at least read a little bit of his work does help me feel a little bit less scared of this one. However, there's also just so many long books on this pile that I'm kind of scared to have to read through all of these massive, massive chonkers. And then finally for the Russians, finally it's a book that is not a chonker, and also I've already read it, and this is Fathers and Sons by Turgenev. This was one of the books that I actually did read for my undergraduate course that some of these other books are from as well. And that has been about a decade ago, so I have to admit that I don't really remember what this is about. I kind of remember it being about generation gaps in terms of politics and sort of about nihilism and that sort of thing. But I really remember it as being quite an easy read in the sense that it was very engaging, and even sort of bridging the gap in knowledge and in time actually felt quite easy in this novel. So this is one of the books that I think I should add to my pile of to reread books, because I really want to know what this was actually about, and I am also really curious to read more by Turgenev. Then we're moving on to the Bill Bryson section, now that we've finished all the Russians, and the first one is Shakespeare by Bill Bryson. This is a book I received when graduating high school, so this has been in my collection for a very, very long time, and I did read it when I received it, and I really found this quite fun. This is like a little popular non-fiction book about Shakespeare and what we know and what we don't know about Shakespeare, and I think what I mainly took from this is that we just don't really know that much about Shakespeare, that like knowing his life is actually quite difficult, and that there's just not a lot of textual evidence of his life. But at the same time, Bill Bryson is a really sort of engaging, fun writer, and this was a really easy read, and I would love to reread this, especially now I'm actually reading more of Shakespeare's work, and I think this would just be a fun little background information type thing. Then I also have A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson, and I did start this when I got it. I don't remember whether I received this as a present or not, or whether I bought this myself. I don't really know. This is what the title says, A Short History of Nearly Everything. So I think it sort of starts at like the Big Bang and then works its way up. So it's about science, it's about history, but this is also one of those books where I think I should just try it again, especially because it's been about 10 years ago since I last tried this, and I've changed a lot in that time. So I'm hoping that maybe if I revisit this, I'll really enjoy my journey through everything with Bill Bryson. The last two books that my mum brought with her for me are two fantasy books, and they are Before They Are Hanged and Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. And I've also got the first book in this series, but I already had that at my place. So now I actually have the trilogy. Am I holding this upside down? No, I am not. I now actually have the trilogy, and I read the first one in this series, I think in 2012, so around the time that I also started reading Robin Hobb. And just like Robin Hobb, I started this series, really enjoyed the first book, and then just didn't continue. And, you know, I'm trying to change my ways. I'm trying to actually finish series that I've started. So I'm very happy that I now have the complete trilogy, and hopefully I can like reread the first book, because I don't remember that much about it, and then move my way beyond that. We're making some good progress, so let's move on to the books that I bought when my mum was here and we went book shopping. So the first book I bought was Medieval Bodies by Jack Hartnell, and this might be one of the most beautiful covers that I've ever seen, like the illustration, and it's got a little bit of foiling. I don't know if you can see that. This is a really beautiful book, and it's about like what it says, medieval bodies. It looks at various parts of the body, so like the heart, the skin, etc. And it does some sort of cultural reading of what these body parts would signify in medieval culture and how they are connected, for example, to medieval art. And this sounds really interesting. I don't know that much about the medieval period, but I find it a really interesting period at the same time. And this sounds like exactly the kind of thing that I would enjoy. I'm really into sort of cultural histories of how people used to live every day and how they conceptualized various aspects of their lives. And I think this is one of those books that will teach me a lot while also being just very entertaining. It's got a lot of pictures of various artworks, which are really beautiful, so I'm really looking forward to reading this. And secondly, I also got the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius is a Roman emperor. I don't really remember in what year he was emperor, but you know, it was a long time ago. And his Meditations are sort of a philosophical work, but written for himself. So he's constantly writing to himself to remind himself of certain values and certain ideas. This book really upset me in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with the book. However, I have the audiobook version of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius by Penguin, and this is a Penguin edition. And I was like, great, let me get a paperback and I can do like an immersion read. I can like read the paperback, listen to Richard Armitage read this to me. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be so relaxing. It's going to be great. So I put on my audiobook, I opened this book, and it turns out it's not the same version, even though the audiobook is by Penguin. This book is published by Penguin, yet it's not the same translation. So this is actually an older translation from the 1960s, whereas the audiobook is based on a newer translation. And I feel kind of ripped off. Like, why is Penguin still publishing this old version when in a different Penguin version it's the new translation. Like, how does that make any sense? Anyway, I did finish this and I did really enjoy it, and I will talk about it more in a recent reads wrap up. A little while ago, I went to Lyon in France, which, by the way, if you want to go to a city in France and you're kind of tired of Paris, or not necessarily tired of Paris, but just tired of the crowds of tourists in Paris, I really recommend Lyon. It's a really beautiful, really fun city, and it's got all of the things that you would want in a tourist destination. And it's also really easy to reach. I took the train there and it was just lovely. Anyway, while I was in Lyon, I also bought 2 books. Now, my French is not great. I'm learning French at the moment, so I'm taking French classes. But it's not great yet. So if you're like, but Celine, you bought French books, can you actually read them? The answer is yes, with great difficulty and actually looking up every other word. So is this an efficient purchase? Not really. This is more of an aspiring purchase, an ambitious purchase, a purchase where I'm hoping to get to it and hoping to sort of reach the level of French that I can actually read this properly. And the first book that I bought is Mémoires, jeune, fille, rangée by Simone de Beauvoir. This is her memoir of her childhood, and I'm not entirely sure what period this covers up to because there's also 3 sequels that sort of all tackle a different period in her life. I'm really interested in the lives of women in history, and you'll see a couple more of those kinds of books coming up. Beauvoir is mainly known for her really famous feminist work, The Second Sex, in which she sort of outlines how women are always seen as the lesser sex. And I haven't read that one yet, but I'm also quite interested just in her life in general. I'm looking forward to dictionarying my way through this book. The second book I bought is Les Neuf, vies de Sappho by Laure de Chantal. In English, this would be translated to The 9 Lives of Sappho. And this is a book about Sappho, the Greek poet, who lived on Lesbos a really, really long time ago in ancient Greece. This author looks at the heritage of Sappho and particularly how her image has been used throughout the development of feminist thought. So she looks at various waves of feminism and looks at how Sappho as a figure was sort of seen in various points in time. And this book sounds really interesting, and it hasn't been translated into English. So, you know, if I want to read it, I'm going to have to read it in French, and I've already started. And it's going okay. You can sort of see, you know, I'm on the second page. I need to translate quite a lot of words, but you know, I'm getting there, and it is a very fascinating topic that I am really excited to learn more about. Then the final section is letters and memoirs, and the first one I have is the letters and journal of Fanny Burney, or also known as Frances Burney. This is a selection of her journal and her letters because if this were all of it, it would be much, much, much longer. Frances Burney is mainly known now for being a novelist, and she has published, her most famous work is Evelina, but she also published a couple of other works, and I recently discussed Cecilia, so if you would like to know more about Frances Burney as a novelist, please do check out that video. Frances Burney has lived quite an eventful and interesting life, so she has worked as a novelist, but she was also invited and worked in the court of King George III and Queen Charlotte. And part of these journals are about that time. But then she also married, I think, a French general? I'm not entirely sure what his military rank was. And as the Napoleonic War developed, she sort of found herself stuck in France. I really enjoy having a little glimpse into people's lives and to sort of read their personal documents. It feels really personal and kind of like you're getting like a sneak peek. The next book that I bought is also a journal, and that is The Journal of Dorothy Wordsworth. She is the sister of the poet Wordsworth, and she lived with him for quite a long time, and this is the journal that she kept while she lived in Grasmere, which is in the Lake District, I think, in England. This is the journal that she kept. And I, again, just kind of want to know what their everyday life was like, and I've heard that she sort of describes really minute parts of life, and which might be a fun contrast to Frances Burney because she was describing much more sort of like, you know, she was in the upper echelons of society, whereas this is just set in a really rural setting, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. And this is a really lovely edition. It's got like really nice pictures and paintings in it, so very excited about this one. And last but not least, I have saved the most strangely shaped book I have ever seen in my life for the last one, and that is My Dear Cassandra, or the Illustrated Letters of Jane Austen. And you gotta admit, this is a weird shape for a book, and even when I look in the inside, it doesn't make more sense. Like, this could have just been a regular shaped book. There would have been space for the illustrations and the pictures and the marginalia, and I just don't really get it. Like, what were they thinking? But anyway, I am really looking forward to reading this book. I am particularly excited by the fact that it's just got a lot of pictures in it, and I'm a sucker for pretty pictures, and I really enjoy looking at sort of historical paintings, and I like looking at the landscapes as they were when these people were alive, because obviously a lot has changed due to industrialization and just the growing of the amount of people that live in England. So I'm really excited to look through this and to learn a little bit more about Jane Austen as a person, because I have read all of her books, but I don't really know much about her in a biographical sense. So yes, really excited for this one as well. So that was my most recent book haul. These are all the books that I recently added to my bookshelves, and sadly I am unable to like hold them up for you, but just sort of imagine that they're here. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe you saw something that you find interesting too. If you've read any of these, do let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, do you also just start books and then just never finish them? Or is that just me? Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you sometime soon. Bye! The next book that she brought with her was Paradise Lost by John Milton. Is that his name? Yes. The next book that she brought was Paradise Lost by John Milton. Why is that hard? What was I saying? I don't remember. This is one of the books that I did read for my undergraduate course, and that was about a decade ago. So, was it a decade ago? Yeah. Then the last two books that my mum brought with me, no. And the first book that I bought is Simone de Beauvoir's memoir. So these are the journals of Dorothy Wordsworth. The next book that I bought is also a journal, and that is Dorothy Wordsworth.